Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to revisit the Dynaudio M10 bookshelf speaker. You can see it here to my right and on the screen behind me. They come in white and black and they're $800. So I reviewed this speaker a long time ago, and I'll be honest, I got a lot of hate for this video. A lot of people felt like I did not describe these speakers properly. People were saying I was deaf, I didn't have good ears, I didn't know how to describe speakers, and everything I was saying was not consistent with the Dynaudio sound. Granted, I asked all of those people if they owned the speakers and if they had actually heard them, and not one person replied by saying, yes, they actually own the speakers. So it's been about a year now. I figured these deserve a revisit. Let's see, does my original assessment still hold true? Was I wrong with my initial impression? And so on. So I'm not really going to take you through the specs on this because it doesn't really have anything that stands out to me except one thing that I do find kind of odd around back. But for whatever it's worth, we do have a silk dome tweeter up top and a 5 1/4 mid-bass driver down low. You probably can't see it too well because the part's clear, but there's actually a ring around the binding post that stops you from being able to use spade connectors. So I don't know, that's kind of weird because you can still use, there's a little hole in it so you can still use bare wire termination. You can use banana plugs, but you can't use spades because there's just a little shield stopping you from doing that for some reason. Maybe that's to be in compliance with some kind of law in some country, who knows. You also can't remove it, I did try. So let's start at the top. The treble is what I find the most interesting on the speaker, and what it is essentially is it's going to be on the forward side of neutral quite a bit. The quantity of the treble is going to be very high, but the initial attack and presentation of the treble is going to be on the smoother side. The initial attack is a little bit softened. The edges of the notes are a little bit rounded. So it's not ear piercing despite its massive quantity and bright sound. It is smooth and bright at the same time, if you will. It does lead to a bit of a sensation of being bashed in the face with a pillow constantly, if I'm being completely honest. There is a good amount of detail there, but not the amount of detail you would expect for how high the overall treble quantity is, and I did find that to be a little bit of a disappointment. Generally speaking, at this price point of $800, if the speaker is on the brighter side, I do expect it to have more detail. I'll be honest, at $800, even if the speaker is on the neutral side in the top end, I still expect it to have a little bit more detail than the average speaker under that price range, but that just wasn't the case here. Moving down to the mid-range, it's going to be super recessed. This is a V-curve speaker, and it is a deep V-curve. The vocal performance is going to sound like it's a few steps back than normal. It's definitely going to be like recessed. Vocalists aren't going to pop out. They're not going to have that in your room experience whatsoever. And unfortunately, the mid-range is so recessed that there's not much center image actually. The vocalists will still be in the middle, but they're so far back, the overall soundstage and image just does not feel true to life. The sense of scale is somewhat missing, and it just doesn't come together in a way it should. Keep in mind, I've had these in a few different rooms and I've paired them to about every amplifier I've ever had here. Let's move down to the mid-bass. Mid-bass, there's no mid-bass bloat or anything like that, but moving down to the bass generally and overall, being a V-curve speaker, there's quite the boost around the 45 hertz tone, maybe as much as like 3, 4, or 5 dB compared to usual. And that paired with that like super bright top end and the recessed mids is what gives this speaker its overall sound signature. Now, in some videos, you might hear me or other reviewers say, it's not the tightest bass. And me, at least when I say that, that's just all I mean. It's not the tightest. That's not the case here. The bass is a little bit laggy. It is definitely on the slower side. If I'm being completely honest, the bass from this speaker, while it's quite plentiful in terms of quantity and its extension is quite good, it does essentially sound like a ported subwoofer. So if you don't like a ported subwoofer, you might want to just stop here. This is probably not for you. And if you don't like bright speakers or a deep V-curve, again, this is probably not for you. I think this speaker is not for most people, honestly. If you own these and you came here to this video hoping for validation, I do apologize. You're not going to get much at all. I think these are not that good. And you guys might be like, whoa, he's a reviewer. Why is he being all subjective? I'll tell you in a second here why I'm being subjective and why I think these speakers are simply not good. First reason. So at the $800 price point, I do feel like someone spending that much money is not looking for a deep V-curve fun speaker. You know what I mean? I think they're looking for something that's a little bit more on the neutral side or if it's not neutral and it's got a flavor of its own, it's not the cheap sound. Let's be honest, the V-curve sound is the cheap sound. You generally find it in the budget category. You hear it when you're driving in the ghetto and someone pulls up next to you with a cheap sound system in their car where the trebles are turned up to the max. There's a ton of bass coming from the car, but you can't even tell what song they're playing because there's absolutely no mid-range to speak of. That's reason one. Reason two, there are cheaper speakers with similar sound signatures that I think are better. I'll give you one example, and this might sound kind of extreme. The $229 Emotiva B1 Plus has a similar sound signature. Its top end is a little bit brighter, though its initial attack is soft, so a little bright, little smooth at the same time, yeah? Its mid-range, a little bit recessed, and its bass around the 45 hertz tone is a little bit overdone. It is nowhere near as slow and sloppy in the bass region as this speaker. It's nowhere near over the top bright like this speaker, and its mid-range is nowhere near as recessed as this speaker. From top to bottom, that speaker, while having a similar sound signature to these, is much better in its overall presentation, in my opinion, and I like listening to those quite a bit, even though the sound signature is the same, and I definitely hate listening to these. And the fact that those are $229 and these are $800 is reason two on why I think this is a bad speaker. Now, reason three on why I think this is a bad speaker, and by the way, if you're thinking for a second to leave some nasty comments on like something, let me make one thing clear. You guys ask reviewers to be honest all the time. And anytime I've got something negative to say about a speaker or an amplifier or a subwoofer, there is always someone in the comments with some shit to say about why I might be wrong with my assessment. One guy recently suggested that my experience with the Monitor Audio Bronze 100 would have been better had I let them break in for 6 months. Guys, are you kidding me? No one's gonna do that. That's insane. And I don't mean to call that guy out in the comments, but I hope you realize, I mean, if it takes 6 months for a product to break in, that's not break-in, that's a serious design flaw. Could you imagine if you bought a car and it drove like crap and the dealership said, don't worry, buddy, in 6 months it'll start to drive nicer. You'd return it. Anyways, okay, third reason on why I don't think this is a good speaker. It is totally not in line with the Dynaudio house sound whatsoever. My good friend Brandon owns a pair of the Dynaudio Evoke, and he's owned a few other pairs of Dynaudio speakers, and he actually wanted to buy these from me. He lives a few hundred miles up north, so I described the sound to him because, you know, I didn't want to just ship them to him and sell them to him if he might not like them. And when I described the sound to him, he was like, wow, that is the total opposite of the Dynaudio speakers I own here and all the ones I've owned. You know, and I've talked to other people as well who have said the same thing. So what I think happened, for what it's worth, I think this being Dynaudio's cheapest speaker, they mistakenly assumed it was going to be entry-level market, average consumer buying this. But let's be honest, guys, the average consumer is not spending $800 on speakers. Only audiophiles are going to do that. So they mistakenly believed their market was the average consumer, so they gave it a V-curve. I think the speaker engineer or designer or someone was like, yo, these are too bright, we need to smoothen them out. So they smoothened out the top end, tried to give it a little bit more refinement, which I think was a good idea. Because if it was sharp with its initial attack and as bright as it is, it would just make your ears bleed. But at the end of the day, like I said, none of Dynaudio's other speakers have this kind of voicing. So it's a bad representation of the brand as a whole. If you look at other product categories, whether it be like, let's use cars. I always use cars, right? If you buy a more affordable Toyota, it is in a similar flavor to a more expensive Toyota. In fact, the brand is so consistent with its overall experience with cars, it even gives you a taste of what the Lexus brand is like. There's no Toyota you can buy today, take it for a drive, and then drive the next expensive model and be like, wow, this is totally the opposite. It's not like that. It's going to just incrementally be a similar flavor, but get better as you move up the model line. I think that's a much more intelligent approach to making a product line, and I can understand why Dynaudio didn't do that here. I can understand why they felt the need to give this a more consumer voicing, but if that's the case, this should be $350. It should not be $800. There's nothing to its sound that makes me feel like it's worth $800. I'm trying to think if there's like anything positive about this that I've left out. There is tons of bass for its size. There really is. So I said, I would say a subwoofer is optional. I didn't use a subwoofer for most of my listening. And the reason for that, honestly, is these had so much bass and it was so like sloppy and boomy and like boxy sounding. I just couldn't integrate a subwoofer. I didn't have a subwoofer here crappy enough to integrate well with these. All my subwoofers are on the tighter side. They're good subwoofers. They're high-end subwoofers. They sound clean and articulate. And when you have two kinds of bass and one is lower quality, the higher quality bass can't lift up the lower quality one. It just kind of meshes and sounds like, not that good. And that's why in previous videos you've heard me say if your speakers are slow and sloppy with their bass, you probably want to get different speakers. Definitely before adding a subwoofer, hoping that'll fix the problem, because it generally will not. So I've given you the sound signature. I've given you the very subjective breakdown. Many of you guys have asked for this kind of presentation in my videos. You guys said you appreciated the kind of like sound signature and stuff, but a lot of you guys said you want to know what I think subjectively. So there you are. 800 bucks. Feel like it's total ripoff. Emotiva Airmotive B1 Plus. Again, similar sound signature, better speaker. And there are a lot of other speakers that are cheaper than this that I do think are better. ELAC DBR62, for example, comes to mind. And I mean, look, I'm going to shut up here because if I go on past this, I'm just going to start bashing it, and that's not my intention. If anyone thinks I've just been bashing the speaker so far, incorrect. I have not been bashing it. I've been giving you my subjective opinion, and I've been backing up with why I feel that way. So I'm going to shut up here, and until next time, later.